Is I have a double class tonight.
Hello.
Greetings.
Hello, all.
Hi.
Bonjour.
Welcome. Lee.
How is everyone?
Where's my video?
Terrific.
Hello.
Yeah. Okay.
Finally got some sun in Pennsylvania.
You do? Good. Okay. As you guys are filing in, okay, don't hesitate to say hello. Let us know where you are.
Buongiorno, buon pomeriggio, buonasera.
Uh-oh, someone's in Italy. I mean, if I hear Italian. Right?
We wish we were.
I see some regulars. I see some new people.
Hi from Denver.
I see Ella Dyer, who's actually in my daughter's bedroom at the moment.
Hi, Ellen.
Hi.
Uh-huh.
I see lots of friends. I'm in Nogent-sur-Marne.
All right. Okay, so not so far away.
No, Adrian, I don't know if you remember, but I've known you since Money Matters for Women at Weiss.
Oh my God, that goes back a long way, right, Ellen? I do. Of course, I remember you. Are you kidding?
Yeah, we've seen each other. I mean, we have seen each other at the library, and we've seen each other, off and on.
Of course, of course. I see Janet Hallstrand.
Yes, I see as well, and they.
Judy Rock. Judy, you do not miss. I want to thank you, Judy Rock. You are my most loyal participant. Okay.
Merci.
Nobody beats your record. Okay.
That's
just so you know. I see Barb Westfield. Barb, are you in Chicago?
I'm in Chicago, getting ready to fly back home to France.
Get down to it, folks.
Yay.
Hi, Patty. Hi, Ella.
I see my cousin Leslie in Perugia. There she is.
This is like romper room.
Nancy Kissick, I want to see your big smile. I see you there. Up, Eileen Walker.
Hey.
Yeah.
Eileen's in
Listen,
the
I
house.
hope you don't mind. I'm just being random here, okay? Going through to see who's on. Not everybody has their camera on. Some people are very circumspect. Lisa Reeves is here, I see, from San Francisco. Yeah, so yeah, okay, you guys know how to use the chat, right?
Yeah, I'm just chatting away here, eh?
Okay, so no, but in the chat, and I ought to open my chat screen up so that I can see what you guys are saying. Yeah, use your chat. Be sure to say whatever you want to say, as long as it's nice. And what's going to happen is Patty. Where's Patty?
Right down there.
Patty's down. I don't see Patty on my screen, believe it or not. Patty Sedatis is a co-host, and there she is with a niece in the background. She's going to be monitoring your chat messages, okay, because she's one of our co-hosts. And we might have a lot of new people on that have not been on before because they come via the promotion with ARROW, which is the Association of Americans Resident Overseas, which is sort of in a way, co-sponsoring this event because of William Jordan's relationship with them as president of the Paris chapter. Is that right? Did I get that right? I'm
president of the entire organization.
Okay, wait, excuse me.
Headquarters are in Paris.
Based in Paris, but it's an international, its scope is international.
Okay, great. Well, now I have been told that because we have some people who are not necessarily familiar with this event, okay, our monthly event, that I should, say, yes, my name is Adrian Leeds, describe who I am. And that I run a company that is the motto of which is French property the American way. We primarily do real estate and assist Americans in moving to France, okay, only in France. But we have been doing this event since 2003, every single month on
You
the
listen to it,
second
okay?
Sunday
You're
of
not
the
watching
month.
it anymore.
And usually, of course, it's live in Paris at the Café de la Mairie, which today I saw is starting to reopen their doors as of the 19th of May. So we're thrilled about that. But because of COVID-19, we've been holding this event on Zoom, which has been fantastic, quite honestly, because all of you people who are not in Paris would not have been able to attend. And now you have an opportunity to participate. So we're going to try, when we do go live again, we are going to try to somehow marry these two ideas so that we can do it live as well as on Zoom, so that we don't lose this wonderful momentum and all you people can continue to participate. We have a speaker every month. We've had an amazing variety of just really, really, really interesting people over the years. And William has spoken, oh my gosh, William, how many times have you spoken?
I can't
3 or
remember if
4?
it's 4 or 5.
Oh, see, and that's because people love William's dialogue. The conversation is so interesting that they just want him to keep coming back. So we're so thrilled that he's here. And I'm going to tell you why he's such a special guy, okay? Because first of all, his talk is going to be that overseas Americans are citizens too. Why changing Washington's opinion of overseas Americans actually matters. That's the topic. And he is a retired US diplomat who has lived outside of the US for 27 years. For 27 out of the past 39. Okay. I'm coming up on my 27th year in Paris too, William, believe it or not. But he was in the Foreign Service for 30 years, between 1981 and 2011, as a political officer specializing in the Arab world and France. So he has a particular knowledge on the Middle East that is incredible. And his overseas assignments included Arab nations such as Saudi Arabia, Tunisia, Syria, Jordan, and Algeria. And his responsibilities included reporting and analyzing foreign policy trends, especially as they related to the US, as well as internal politics, including the rise of radical Islamist forces. This discussion today will be devoted to what the real issues Americans face living overseas, when there are plenty, I can tell you, and how and why we are treated unfairly or not from the US government's point of view. Okay? Now, if you guys who watches France 24? Anybody watch France 24?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That is the national news channel, and it broadcasts in French, English, and Arabic, and now Spanish. And he's on France 24 a lot. I've seen him lots of times in special interviews. And he's also the man in the know for BBC, for Radio France International, and he lectures on foreign affairs at the French École Militaire and at the Paris campus of New York University. Since May 2020, William has been, and thank you for correcting me, the president of the Association of Americans Resident Overseas. In addition to that, he's joined the board of the St. Petersburg, Florida, not Russia, Conference on World Affairs. And he's one of those Americans in Paris who has made important contributions to our lives, and of whom we as Americans, and this is really true, are unduly proud. On that note, okay, we are going to mute you all. Okay, Patty, would you please do that? Mute everybody.
It's gonna mute you too.
Except for me and William.
I can't do that.
And I'm unmuted again. Now, once we do the Q&A, what I'd really like is you could put your questions in the chat, and then Patty is going to call on you and ask you to unmute so that we can have a real dialogue and kind of feel like we're sort of really there in person instead of it being so monologue-ish. And we've got plenty of time, and I know you're going to have plenty of questions. So on that note, Monsieur Jordan, would you like to
Merci.
start?
Merci. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
Shukran. Thank you very much, everybody, for showing up. I appreciate the interest in what I have to say, and I will apologize in advance, or I will make note of two things. First, I just returned to France from the United States yesterday, and I could say, and boy, I just flew in, and boy, are my arms still tired. But more than that, if I nod off, please bear with me because I'm still dealing with the jet lag. This is a great opportunity for me, given the stimulation I'll get from the questions and answer, to help me stay awake as we go forward. So I'm really looking forward
to wake you up. Okay.
That's it. That's it.
That's it.
Constant doses of adrenaline pumping questions. And on that, in fact, I'm ready to answer just about anything anybody wants to, throw at me relating to Americans overseas, relating to ARO, the Association of Americans Resident Overseas, but also the things that I've often talked about at this group, which has to do with the reality of diplomacy, what it's like to be a diplomat, and even talking about whether you want to or not, the Middle East, North Africa, terrorism. Somebody even seemed at one point to want to talk about how they thought political Islam or Islamism in France might affect the 2022 elections here. I'm happy to talk about all of it. I was also thinking that later on, as we get through sort of the main stuff that I want to talk about in my semi-prepared remarks on ARO, that those of you who are in the States, those of you who are looking to get back over here into Europe or other places, if you want to talk about the issues as I see them and as Adrian sees them on living overseas now, happy to do it, because there's no question in my mind that the pandemic has changed a lot of things. But that's not the main reason that I'm here. The main reason that I'm here, as the title of the talk indicates, is Americans should be aware, if they aren't already, that they have an image problem in Washington. That Washington doesn't perceive, Americans who decide to pick up and go outside the confines, outside the borders of the United States of America. They don't necessarily view them very well, and that has political ramifications because it often has real consequences, as Adrian constantly points out, in terms of banking, in terms of taxation, a whole slew of regulations that complicate our lives in terms of being able to live our daily lives overseas, but also there are implications as far as voting is concerned. There are implications as far as transmission of nationality if you have children with a non-American spouse. ARO is very interested and very concerned about all of these things. And in fact, one of the things that I would like everybody to take away from this, and I'll come back to it, is to stress how important it is to be engaged, informed, to be aware of what's happening in the United States, and to mobilize as necessary to make your concerns and your opinions known. Because as this is a phrase, ARO, I should say, ARO's traditional and long-standing motto has been Americans helping Americans abroad. And that's absolutely true. We do a lot, as I will explain later, to help Americans across the board living overseas. But I'm very keen on pushing a second slogan, which is that overseas Americans are citizens too, to bring home the point, especially to people in Washington, that we didn't stop being American and we didn't lose a lot of the rights, privileges, and protections that Americans in the United States enjoy just because we decided to live overseas. Our circumstances may be different because we're living overseas, but we are as American as anybody living in the United States. And what ARO's point is that we need to be treated that way as a starting point, and to be brought into a lot of these discussions, especially when it comes to things that affect us in key ways, like taxation, like regulations on banking, like citizenship transmission, and even, I will add, immigration, because those of us overseas who decide to marry foreign nationals may need to keep that in, may need to have that very much in mind. And today is sort of an auspicious day to be talking to you all about this, because in the Senate Finance Committee, they're supposed to be starting hearings that I'll talk about a little bit later about tracking down the supposed $1 trillion in lost revenue to the US Treasury caused by people who pack up and move outside the United States or put their wealth outside the United States, hopefully in their mind, you know, for those people who are expatriating themselves out of beyond the reach of Uncle Sam. And that's a grotesque and distorted stereotype of Americans living overseas that Arrow is doing its utmost to dispel. So let me just tell you a little bit about Arrow, because I think it's very important in terms of history to understand where the organization came from and what prompted its concerns. Arrow is one of two key organizations based in Paris that a very impressive woman named Phyllis Michaud set up after World War II, when she moved to France from the United States and married a Frenchman and began to encounter, as they had children, a lot of issues relating to the transmission of citizenship that she alone was not just facing, but that thousands of Americans like her who were in exactly the same circumstance were having, ensuring that their children got American nationality. And that had a lot to do with the citizenship laws at the time that then, and I think to a certain extent still, place a heavy burden on women, in other words, mothers who have children with a foreign spouse or a foreign father, to be able to transmit that citizenship to an American based on whether or not the American woman had spent enough time in the United States. Over the years, a lot of this has changed, and one of the reasons why it's changed is because Phyllis Michaud, in the about 60 years ago, set up an organization in France called the Association of American Women in Europe, that militated, or I should, that's actually, I'm using French, that made a great effort, that campaigned for liberalizing the rules so that they were at least equalized between men and women transmitting citizenship to their children. It's a lot easier for men, according to American law, to do this than women. You go figure it out, but it says a lot about the sexism, the misogyny, the patriarchal nature of American politics and thinking, certainly, you know, in earlier decades. That the success of that effort prompted Phyllis, as she was looking at the full gamut of issues facing Americans overseas, from the requirement to be taxed, you know, when they on their earnings overseas, just like Americans back in the States, in addition to whatever they were paying locally to a foreign government. The voting questions, the problems that Americans living overseas were having, being able to qualify to vote in the state that they may have still been resident, to be able to file absentee ballots, to be able to participate in one of the most fundamental and sacred duties of an American citizen. That was one of the these were the galvanizing issues that caused Phyllis to work with other people to set up the organization I now am president of, which is this Association of Americans Resident Overseas. By the way, I want to stress, I prefer the term Americans overseas to American expats or American expatriates, because there's a double meaning, or there's an ambiguous meaning when you talk about expats or expatriates, because the assumption can be that you're trying to get away from being an American. And my contention is that the majority of Americans who move overseas aren't trying to divest themselves or are no less interested in being Americans. They've just decided they've decided for whatever reason, they're not going to live any longer in the United States. They're going to find their way and their place overseas, and you know, for all manner of reasons. Phyllis, like I said, is one of the remarkable women. I would include Adrian among them, who have been key members, in fact, pillars of the American community in France, and particularly in Paris, who have really moved and shaken things over the years. So you're looking at me, some guy who's
very kind of you. Okay, but
well, it's merited.
Okay, but I have only one comment, and that is to say that I feel more of an American living in France than I did living in the United States, because we're so singled out as different that we have to embrace our Americanism in such a way. I mean, I've always been very much a part of the American community for that reason, but and I don't think that that's seen from the US side. I think you're right. We're seen as traitors, not expatriates with an A, as expatriates with an O.
Right, exactly. And I think this is the bias that even in my own family, even among you know, or people who barely know me, you know, they will often ask the question, so when are you coming back? You know, when I'm in the US, so when are you coming back? And I have an answer that I won't bother everybody with now, but if somebody wants to ask me what the 3 reasons I give, or the 3 things that I believe have to happen before I seriously consider moving back to the States are, I'll tell you. But what I think has been key to an organization like Arrow is that it has gotten over the years since Phyllis Michaud founded it, is that it has maintained its dedication to trying to right a lot of these wrongs, a lot of these misperceptions, as well as the inequities and the injustices that are done to Americans in terms of how they're treated by their own government, and particularly by their elected representatives in Congress. And so, what are these issues that Arrow is primarily focused on? And I'm not going to pretend to give a full list, and I throw that disclaimer out there because I know there are a number of people in Arrow watching, and I don't want them immediately to pile on and say, but William, you forgot about. I will simply highlight a few of the key issues that we are always watching and concerned about. Not necessarily in a priority order, but I'm going to try to put them in more or less the ranking order of the things that we either get a lot of questions about, we either have to be on the alert for what Congress and others may be doing, or there are things that we find common cause with other organizations out there, some of them not even for primarily working on American citizens issues, but they may be working on something else having to do with matters that are of concern to us. The first is taxation.
Well, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
before you get into that, we have an awful lot of people in chat who want to know what your reasons are for not wanting to move back to the States.
Okay, I have 3. There are 3 things that I tell everybody that have to happen in the United States before I will consider packing up at some great expense everything I own here and moving back to the States. I mean, and I'll tell you, the pandemic has really tested my love of living in France and in Paris, which I consider to be my home now. But the first, and this again is not in any particular ranking order, the first is real reform of the American healthcare system. I mean, something approaching what France has, something that is more universal, that allows you a great deal of choice in terms of your providers, something that will probably be a lot more expensive than Americans are used to paying in general for healthcare until they actually have a serious condition, but something that really provides you a level of protection from cradle to grave that doesn't exist in the United States. Not the National Health Service in Britain, not something that I would call genuine socialized medicine, but something that is heavily funded by and it requires a lot of taxation in solidarity in order to support. The second thing is real gun reform, changes to the laws on possessing firearms in the United States. I'm of a generation that remembers when it was possible after the 2 Kennedy assassinations, after the assassination of Martin Luther King. In the 1970s, the concern about Saturday night specials. I remember when sensible gun reform, as it's called, was possible. It's just crazy now. And you can even associate that with some of the nuttiness having to do with Citizens United in terms of, large political action committees being able and corporations being able to donate almost unlimited amounts of money to presidential campaigns as people. But the real restrictions on firearms that are sensible. I'm not a believer in repealing the Second Amendment, but I think the founding fathers did write the Second Amendment the way that they did on purpose. And the third thing is real investment in public transportation so that people don't have to use cars to get around everywhere. That is probably, to me right now, the thing that causes me to want to tear out my eyeballs and return to France immediately, is every time I'm back in the States in a rental car.
But isn't that a sign of the bigger problem of just not really caring about global warming in a big way?
I think there's a lot of selfishness that many people in the US, again, I apologize to those of you I may be offending by saying this, but this comes from having thought about, all the people in the cars on Capitol Boulevard in Raleigh, North Carolina, trying to get, from point A to point B and having to go down this overcrowded road. And I'm thinking to myself, a lot of these people would probably like an alternative to what they're living, but every day they are probably coming down to just, if they manage to make it work, getting to where they need to go, however they need to get there, and the price of gas is not through the roof, and they can kind of afford to make everything work, why change it? I just think it's more of an issue. It's less of an issue of, oh, I'm against the ecology, or I'm against the environment, oh, I want to be burning fossil fuels. It's just that people don't see an alternative. They've never really lived anything else. And I think that they're just sort of trapped in their comfort bubble. And it speaks of a certain lack of what the French and others in Europe call solidarity, which in my view doesn't really exist as a concept in the United States. I mean, people will come together when they need to, and there's a lot of charitable giving and whatever, but there's not this sense like there is here in France in particular, that it's worth it to invest in infrastructure and that favors public transportation quite in the same way. I mean, look at the arguments that are already developing around the infrastructure proposals, that the Biden administration has put out, and think about how enthusiastic, although a little crazily, Donald Trump talked about wanting to spur infrastructure development during his administration. So, to me, there's just, again, I'm not living in a lot of areas of France where transportation is a challenge. Public transportation is a challenge. I'm privileged enough to be living, and I did it on purpose. I'm living, in a part of Paris that is well served by public transportation, and where if I don't want to use public transportation, the sidewalks and everything else are, set out so that I can relatively easily get to where I want to go on foot, and I can now ride a bike. And let's leave aside the whole issue of Anne Hidalgo and her sort of anti-car craziness or zealousness. But for me, it's very hard when I go back to the States to imagine being in, having to use a car all the time. I use the example that when I cook here in France, when I cook here in Paris, and I realize I don't have any butter, I don't have enough butter, I can usually put everything away real quickly, run down the street, 5 minutes, buy my butter, and I'm back home, within 15 minutes. In the States, even under the best of circumstances, we're talking about, half hour to 45 minutes. And then if I remember I don't have salt, you know, I've got to go through a whole damn thing again. So for me, that's just something that, again, you're absolutely right, Adrian. The environmental irresponsibility of it, the selfishness of it is something that bothers me. I don't like being surrounded by people who are all kind of, again, in their comfort bubble and accept that. So those are my three main things.
Okay, I'm going to throw just another, and I know we've digressed a little bit, but what you're really talking about is the balance between extreme capitalism, okay, and extreme socialism, and how we need both of those things to be a little more moderate, because what you're talking about on the greedy side in the US has to do with the capitalist idea. And that's the reason we have the healthcare system we have in the United States. Okay, this is the reason we don't have good public transportation. I mean, those are basic, the capitalism is what has created those ills, extreme capitalism. Okay, and since socialism is the dirty word in the United States, anything that reeks of that, they're not going to even consider. But we're living in a socialist democracy where we see the benefits of that. And that changes our point of view completely. Anyway, I don't want to get too much on tangent, and this is your talk. So
No. Well, I also appreciate the fact that although when I go back to the States and I have to rent a car, it kind of offsets this. But I also appreciate the fact that living here in Paris, I don't have to maintain a car. I don't have to park a car. I don't have to occasionally get the tires and change the battery and all the rest of it for a car. But anyway, no, I mean, I probably see it less as a dichotomy between capitalism and socialism. Although for me, socialism is not a dirty word. I probably see it more as a dichotomy or a choice, that people feel like is out there that may be a bit false, between having to decide on social, on an approach that emphasizes social responsibility versus whatever makes sense for me. It bothers me that one of the main revenue raisers in states like Virginia is creating toll lanes that on freeways, so that people will pay a premium, and a rather high premium, just to be able to zip along in a less congested part of the highway than everybody else. To me, I would rather see more of an investment like here in rail and other possibilities for moving people around. But that's, if you want to call it socialist, that's socialist.
But we got you off track.
All right.
So, okay, so
that's
sorry.
fine. That's fine.
So
As long as people are enjoying, the discussion, that's fine. So getting back to Arrow's core issues, core concerns. I mean, the first one is obviously, or not obviously, but the first one is taxes. And you'll hear this from me often, and you'll find a lot about this on the Arrow website, which we'll talk about later. Americans are under what's called a citizenship-based taxation system. That is, you pay taxes because you are a citizen of the United States, wherever you live. You could live in Timbuktu, you could live in France, you could live in the United States, you could live in the Marianas Islands. You are going to pay Uncle Sam, or at least you have to file your tax return with Uncle Sam, or you are breaking the law. Arrow has been in favor of moving away from this, partly because, it's a fairness issue. The risk of double taxation or multiple taxation is greater if you are being taxed by the United States after everybody else has had their hands in your pocket. There are a lot of fuzzy areas. There are a lot of things that actually Uncle Sam requires you to declare that cause an enormous amount of headache. If you have investments, if you have mutual fund equivalents overseas, you are going to spend an awful lot of money with a tax preparer, probably, making sure that you fill out all the forms that you need to fill out in order to avoid running afoul of Uncle Sam and possibly risking your, getting audited on all of that. this is the kind of thing that is, just strikes Arrow as being grotesquely unfair. However, Arrow is not into tax avoidance or tax cheating or tax evasion. I want to stress that right from the outset. We do not consider ourselves the allies of those who are trying to get out of the United States simply to be, or in the United States, who are seeking to move their money offshore to hide it from Uncle Sam. We are not but what we believe is that the United States should not be imposing unilateral measures to force Americans or foreign banks to report on American bank accounts overseas, because most of those bank accounts overseas are not to hide money. They're to pay for your utility bills. They're to pay for off your local credit cards. They're to pay for what you are enjoying locally.
Well, especially in France. I mean, you're not,
right.
Money on France is not exactly offshore.
Right. I mean, the thing about a lot of this that Arrow is fighting is again an equity issue. And I mentioned that there are these hearings, to talk about this presumed $1 trillion of possible loss of revenue. Arrow has been fighting to end the citizenship-based taxation regime, to create a sort of residence-based taxation system that would allow people who are living overseas, who have a residence overseas, to be able to pay whatever they have to pay for their local taxes, but be dispensed from having to declare everything to Uncle Sam, but be prepared to pay to Uncle Sam what they owe the United States for those assets that are based in the United States. I mean, if you have a bank account, if you have an investment account, if you are earning capital gains on property or stock sales in the United States, which is what a lot of Americans like yours truly are doing. I'm a retiree. I'm paid, I have to be, I will be very transparent with you and say that my foreign earned income is peanuts. I have 2 interest-bearing accounts here in France that earn me peanuts. But I have to declare that money to the United States. I have to go through all the rigmarole of filing a foreign bank account report every year with the United States, because the balances tend to momentarily go above the threshold. And then of course there's FATCA, the foreign account. I always you know the acronym better than I do, Adrian. Help me out.
Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act.
Right. That was
part
snuck
of the
in.
Hire Act, 2010.
Snuck into a jobs bill by by Democratic proponents of that.
Barack Obama signed it.
He signed it.
Part of the Hire Act.
He signed it. Although how much he knew the implications of it is always a question, because, like I said, it was tucked into some other piece of legislation. Yeah. But it has come to hurt a lot of us, especially those who actually are Americans but don't consider themselves Americans. They were people who through being born in the United States as a child, but immediately, moving overseas with their foreign-born parents, grew up to be Dutch, French, Japanese, whatever, and only found out, the hard way that by being an American, they caused their banks some issues in terms of compliance reporting.
Try getting a mortgage these days.
Sorry?
Try getting a mortgage these days. We are experiencing literal nightmares with the banks, because they really don't want to do business with Americans. And there are fewer and fewer banks that are willing to even open bank accounts.
Right. So Arrow is very much fighting to change this. Banking, which falls right into that, is an issue not so much because of the FATCA and other related. By the way, on FATCA, our position is that the United States should, at a minimum, be open to considering OECD or other mechanisms that most other countries have agreed to in terms of financial reporting, to obtain whatever the United States is concerned about in terms of money laundering or tax evasion, rather than this sort of punitive, heavy-handed, unilateral exertion of American authority, outside of American territory. The related issue is banking, but banking in the United States, banking and investing in the United States. A lot of Americans who move overseas don't realize that if they cut all their ties back in the U.S., say you decide you want to move to France and retire here, and you've sold your house, you've given up the address that you had for years, your bank, if they're not immediately informed about this, if it finds out, may cut you off. And you may not be able to do banking business. You may have your account suddenly closed, including your investment accounts in the US, and you may no longer be able to, hold an American Visa card, an American Express card, etc., because of this. This has a lot to do with anti-money laundering measures that the government has imposed on banks doing business in the US. It has a lot to do with sort of knowing your customer. Much of this is a product of the post 9/11 era, in which the US government is very zealous to track financial flows, especially potentially suspicious financial transactions overseas. And people, it's kind of funny because in a way, the US is still one of the main money havens. I mean, the people who are still out there trying to hide bank accounts overseas, outside of the United States, are actually doing it in the United States, because banking secrecy laws tend to be more zealously observed in the US. But for those of us who are not, super wealthy and can find the banks that are willing to, bend the rules or apply slightly softer rules, people are being thrown out of bank accounts right and left. And this is one of the reasons, and I throw this out there simply because they are, the other organization dealing with these things. This is one of the reasons why American Citizens, is it American Citizens Abroad, ACA, is very proud and very successful, I think, in marketing its ties to the State Department Federal Credit Union. There are other options, and there are other ways, in fact, of getting a membership in a credit union like that allows you to do banking even with a foreign address. But it's hard. It is very hard. And this is something that Arrow is fighting, to change. One of the reasons it's hard is it's not just something that we can change by going to Congress, by going to the US government. This is actually something that banks have to change, because many of these practices are voluntary and they are commercial, and it's the banks that have decided to be strict about this. Another set of issues are citizenship and nationality. As I mentioned, Arrow pays a lot of attention to citizenship issues simply because a lot of Americans overseas are in mixed relationships. They are Americans married to foreign nationals. If they have children, and if they want to transmit their nationality, their American nationality, to their children, there's a lot that goes into documenting various things, depending on the age of the child, depending on how long, whether the child spent any time in the United States, depending on the parents, depending even sometimes on the grandparents. The laws are extremely complex, and we are doing a lot to try to make sure that they are evenly, justly, and as much as possible liberally applied. And indeed, this kind of gets into something that's closely related, but which may not seem initially to be related to concerns about American citizens, and that's immigration. We are not big champions in terms of what should change on immigration, but we know that immigration law is important for Americans living overseas who have foreign spouses and partners and want them to be able to get legally to the United States. So that is a related issue. It's not something that we necessarily take up the cudgel on as fully as some of the other issues. But, you know, green card holders, people who do have legal permanent residence in the United States, find that they fall under the same obligations as far as taxation, for example, is concerned as American citizens. And again, if you believe in the idea, as I do, that legal immigration is the pathway to citizenship and integration into the United States, well, an organization like ours has to take some interest in it. Voting is a big issue. As I said, Phyllis Michaud and others in Arrow fought the fight and largely succeeded in getting the law changed in 1975, and I believe it was subsequently strengthened in '86, so that foreign Americans living overseas had the right to vote in federal elections. It's a bit clunky because the states still decide a lot of the laws as far as how to be registered in a given state. And if you want to get an absentee ballot, for example, from a state, you have to go through the state to prove that you are a resident or to renew your voting eligibility. The law doesn't necessarily automatically allow you to vote in state and local elections. So the degree to which you're an American for whom you care about all of that stuff, or who cares about all of that stuff, dealing with the maze and the welter of different legal regimes in different states is crazy sometimes. And Arrow has, Arrow, this is one issue, this is one area where I probably go too far in saying that Arrow, in my view, is squarely part of the civil rights movement, in as much as civil rights involves equality before the law in terms of such fundamental rights as voting. And we unfortunately didn't manage to get on the bandwagon so quickly, partly because the pandemic made it very hard for us to establish contacts with people on the Hill. But Arrow has always believed that organizations like ours need to be at the table discussing, the voting rights of Americans, because, we're anywhere between 6 to 9 million people, 9 million citizens, and that makes us larger than most states, physically in the United States. So we are potentially a very important voting bloc. And while the figures are hard to come by in terms of the number of Americans overseas who vote, and unfortunately, I don't think we vote in the numbers that we should be voting on, given all the issues we face, still, we are potentially a very important voting bloc. And we're on the state level, we're fighting, in a couple of states, it is still a requirement to provide all of the digits of your social security number. We're trying to get that changed so that at least it's down to just the last 4 or something like that. Some states, including the Democratic state of Maryland, Democratic dominated state of Maryland, continues to make it very hard for the children of Americans overseas who have not spent time in the state to establish a claim to vote. Maryland still imposes a physical residence requirement to be able to do that. Many other states allow children up to, beyond, once they become a voting age, to claim state voting rights through their parents. So that's a technical sort of thing that we're trying to work on. Unfortunately, the challenge there is we don't just get to deal with 535 people on Capitol Hill. It also involves having to deal with the myriad of state legislatures and legislators across 50 or 51 states, if you include the District of Columbia. And then the last issue that is a big concern of ours.
Well, before you go on, I want to ask you one question.
Yeah.
Do you know when our votes are counted? Because I understood that our votes were not counted early on, that they were actually held back and counted only if they were necessary. Does that make any sense whatsoever?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on how you voted. I think it depends on whether you voted,
Absentee,
by a state,
course.
or whether you voted using the federal voting ballot. I'm not an expert on that. It's a good question. I'll have to, okay, I see Ellen LaBelle is waving. So Ellen,
Raising her hand, yes.
Ellen is one of our major experts on this. So if she could be unmuted so she could chime
Well,
in.
Ellen can unmute herself and then, wait.
Ellen, we can't hear you.
Yes,
Okay.
okay. Your vote is counted. That's all that counting that goes on after the election night, all that counting that goes on, those are the absentee ballots. Your absentee ballot is counted. That is why the result of the election is not what is shown on election night. That is why the official count is, well, depending on the election and how many people voted and all that, that is why the official number is given generally a week to 10 days after the day of the election, because they are counting the absentee ballots. It doesn't matter if the absentee ballot comes from abroad or if it comes locally. Some states count the absentee ballots as they come in, even before the election. They're put aside but counted. Other states like Pennsylvania, I'm a Pennsylvanian, doesn't even open the absentee ballots until after the when the polls are closed. So that's what the absentee ballots are counted. They are absolutely counted. That is,
but not until after.
well, it depends on the state.
Well, it depends on the state. Okay.
It depends on the state, and it depends on how many. And also, generally, for the overseas voters, the ballots have a few days to get to the polls, so that the election day is November 3rd. But in Pennsylvania, again, they had a full week to arrive at the polls to be counted. And somehow the former president was not aware of this.
If I can interject, I mean, I voted.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Ellen.
I voted in South Carolina this year, and it was an odd experience. And this is, again, one of the things that I am very keen for Arrow to, publicize or to bring as much attention to. South Carolina, like a lot of states, passed legislation late in the year, relatively speaking, for an election year, like in the summer. They passed a number of measures that, especially for South Carolina, actually made it easier for people to vote. One of the things that they agreed to do for overseas absentee balloting, and remember, we were lucky enough in 1975, when a lot of this changed, we were lucky enough to piggyback on military service members. Administrations, especially Republican administrations, which was the case at the time, always want to do, what they can for our men and women in uniform. Phyllis Michaud and company managed to convince the White House, or key members of Congress, as well as the White House, that all Americans living overseas, civilian employees of the U.S. government, as well as just people living overseas, should get the same consideration as servicemen and women voting, and their families voting from overseas. Mm-hmm. So there was actually a provision made in South Carolina, a very Republican state, that allowed people like me to vote online. And I'll tell you, when I got the email from South Carolina telling me, providing me a link to go online, I didn't believe it. I didn't know what the heck this thing was. I had to call back to South Carolina, to Charleston, South Carolina, and say, is this for real? I mean, am I actually going to vote and push a button and my ballot will be counted? And they said, yes, that's exactly what it means. So, the ideal would be somehow to get things to the point where, for overseas voting, it would be that simple. And I don't know if we'll ever achieve it, but, from a state that can be as retrograde as South Carolina, for something like that to happen was just incredible. No, I didn't, unfortunately, none of my votes beyond the president, well, none of my votes made a difference in South Carolina, but you know, that's another thing.
I just want to interject, Adrian, the reason, and others, the reason people think that the absentee ballots don't count is because often you can call the election before all the votes are counted, because the number of absentee ballots that are expected will not change the result. In the past, in the November election, there were so many absentee ballots.
Right. That wasn't true this year, was it?
There were so many absentee ballots that the number of absentee ballots expected could change the night of
the absentee ballots tend to vote left, and that's why the Republicans are trying to do away with them.
Yeah, but I mean, but then again, you know, it depends on the states. And probably because I know my brother was working at a poll this year, and they were encouraging people to vote absentee locally. They were encouraging people to vote absentee.
Because of COVID, right, because of COVID.
Because of COVID, but
yeah, so I mean, I think the bottom line here is that Arrow's got to do what it can to make the point to everybody, including throughout the 51 legislatures involved, and I include the District of Columbia in that, to try to institutionalize some of this, at least as far as overseas voting is concerned. But, you know, again, it wasn't done across the board throughout the United States. I mean, there were a lot of states where people still voting from overseas had to obtain a ballot or print up a ballot and, you know, mail it back according to a certain prescribed way, if that's what they wanted to do. Again, Ellen is the expert, and we probably ought to figure out some way down the road, Adrian, if you're interested in coming up with some kind of a program that would talk about the voting issues for Americans overseas, because I do think—
And Christy
Lauren, who's a key member of this for us as well. So
I just want to put it on a future agenda.
Well, wrapping up Arrow's priorities. The last thing that I'll mention is provision of consular services overseas. This is something that is important for all Americans living overseas. Anybody who is overseas should know where their nearest consulate is, should know how to find, you know, the website, should be checking the website on a regular basis. And in my view, especially with COVID, should be enrolled in the STEP program, which is called the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program, which will get you signed up for locally generated alerts for everything from security to health issues, protests. I mean, in France, you'll occasionally get them because of concerns about protests that may be happening, which occur, needless to say, a lot around here. It's just very important to realize that, you know, consular officers are always the most important people in your life when you need them, but it's not always easy to get a hold of them in an emergency situation, and it's good to have the understanding of how to get a hold of them and when to get a hold of them. I know here in France, the embassy is doing a lot more to expand the outreach. In fact, Adrian, I've told them they need to make sure they include you in the lunches and things that they're organizing, so that because you're a very important figure, in my opinion, for the American community here in Paris. So the fact is, the consular services are not always as readily available as they should be. COVID has caused a lot of work to happen virtually. There's a lot of telework. It's not as easy to get appointments. It's not as easy to get all the things that you need done in person, including notarials, which are the affidavits or authentications and things like that. Reports of birth, passport renewal, and Arrow is trying to push the State Department to rethink its current model for funding these programs, which is largely through the rather high fees that the State Department charges to do these things. I would add as well that we are concerned about the presence of American other government agencies overseas, like the IRS, like Social Security, because we think that if they are no longer going to be present overseas, then the domestic agencies need to do a better job of making provision for Americans overseas to contact them, either through dedicated phone lines, through, by creating websites that will not immediately reject anything that comes in from a foreign IP address, and the like. The IRS in particular, I'm not somebody who, when I hear, for example, that the Biden administration wants to increase the funding for the IRS, I'm not somebody who says, oh my gosh, that's a bad thing because they're going to be looking at all of the potential tax cheats outside the US. If they actually do a better job of collecting tax in the United States, that $1 trillion gap may narrow largely because of that. There may also be a better mindset in terms of responding positively to what Arrow and others have been saying about the need to have a dedicated service for overseas taxpayers to answer a lot of the very technical questions that that people overseas have. So, having talked about the priorities, the point of the main point here is Congress and agencies in Washington take a special interest in overseas Americans in probably all the wrong possible ways, largely because they often have exaggerated and inflated and stereotyped views of Americans. They all think that we're sitting on our yachts off the Côte d'Azur, sipping champagne, and figuring out, where we're going to, where the best place to get our gold bullion is. And whereas, needless to say, nothing could be further from the truth. Americans, as far as I can tell, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of raw data about this, but I can tell you anecdotally, going back to when I first joined the Foreign Service and did consular work, Americans overseas are just like Americans in the United States in terms of running the socioeconomic gamut, in terms of their incomes, in terms of their wealth, in terms of their overall,
even less rich.
Indeed, sorry.
Even less rich.
Yes.
Come on, you don't come to France to make money. Okay.
Well, that's what people said about joining the State Department. You don't join the State Department to make money, and that's absolutely true. But you do hope, and I'm sure you did when you came to France and set up your business, that you do hope you're going to be able to make a decent living, and you do hope that you're going to be able to, keep your fair share of whatever it is you earn, so that you can live and so that you can expand your business and so that you can basically follow whatever it is you're dreaming about doing. It's what every American wants to do. It's part of the American dream. And I think that, so Arrow is actually in the process of trying to work on, correcting the bad image of Americans overseas. And we're fighting, as I said before, we're fighting various battles on changing the taxation system from citizenship-based taxation to something that would be more locally based, but with an understanding that money you earn as an American in the United States, you probably have to pay some sort of a tax to the United States. FATCA, again, we can go on and on about that. The thing there's so many issues relating to FATCA that I think the main takeaway that I would have here is that throw away many of the partisan biases that you might have about, Democrats versus Republicans in terms of one side being more progressive and one side being more rational versus the other. I would say, as somebody who is very much an independent, but who tends to favor Democratic candidates, I will say, in all honesty, that in my view, Democrats are not our friends. Democrats are the first to pile up against us and to believe that we are all, as I told you before, the current Senate Finance Committee hearings underscore that a lot of us are out here hiding money from Uncle Sam that Uncle Sam deserves to get. Sadly, I can't say the Republicans, who have generally tended to have in their presidential election platforms up until this last nominating convention, a plank having to do with moving away from a citizenship-based taxation system to something that would be more of a residence-based taxation system. Now they, as you probably know, the 2017 campaign platform for the Republican Party was, well, whatever President Trump wants. Right now, they are, I think, adrift and not really paying attention to this. But the one champion in Congress who actually had the guts to put forth a bill trying to move the United States away from a citizenship-based taxation system was a Republican representative, actually from North Carolina, which is currently the closest thing I have to a residence in the United States. Unfortunately, he left because he was because of redistricting, and he knew he was going to lose his seat. But he seems to have some hope of coming back into the Senate. The reality is that for a lot of these things, we lack champions in Washington because A, it's not politically advantageous to advocate on behalf of Americans living overseas. Most of your constituents, most of your voters don't understand Americans living overseas. So to go out on a limb supporting things for us isn't necessarily a vote getter. In fact, it may be a vote loser. Second, there's still, I think, a sufficiently low proportion of Americans Americans in Congress, including staffers, who have lived outside the United States. I remember the 1990s, in the era when Newt Gingrich was pushing his contract with America, and a lot of Republicans were elected to Congress. There was much talk about how a tiny number of them had passports or had ever traveled outside the United States, and this was seen as a bad omen for an understanding of America's role in the world. Well, we can see that there's a real consequence in terms of the perception of Americans overseas. This congressman this representative that I mentioned in North Carolina, one of the reasons he got a lot of our issues was because his wife was originally British, and he had lived, I believe, in the UK, and that's where they met. There is a caucus, a very small caucus in the United States Congress, trying to come together to deal with a lot of these American issues. But so far, I would say that they haven't gotten a lot of traction. And we have not, because of the overriding bias against us, we have not been able to get much headway. And with the Democrats in particular in the Senate, Chuck Schumer is one of the people who is ready to re-sponsor or re-co-sponsor legislation that got botched in the past to make it basically impossible for Americans who renounce citizenship for whatever reason, including taxation, to ever return to the United States. And in my view, this kind of punitive and vengeful attitude towards Americans abroad is sad to say the least, distressing, and in a way rather disgusting. I mean, we are just, as I said, as you said, Adrian, we are seen as not having just expatriated ourselves, but we have made ourselves expatriates of the United States.
Traitors.
So,
We're traitors. We left. You know,
why
love it or leave it.
Why would you want to
right?
leave the greatest country in the world with the greatest healthcare system in the world?
Of course, love it or leave it. Isn't that the motto?
Right.
And we
So-
left it.
So let's turn to Arrow and what I consider to be the main message here. Whether anybody joins Arrow or not, and I'll get to that in a moment. I hope you all take away from this the notion that engagement and paying attention to what's going on in the United States is absolutely critical. We need, as Americans overseas, we need to mobilize. We need to make our representatives aware of our concerns. And I would say that if there's one thing I took away from my time as consular officer many, many years, many, many decades ago, it is that congressmen and women, and I include senators as well as representatives in that, pay attention to what their constituents are concerned about. It may be a bit of a pass-through thing. You know, somebody writes in a letter saying, oh my gosh, you know, my cousin, my Lebanese cousin didn't get a visa to visit the United States. This is terrible. I don't understand why he was rejected, but you know, I'm one of your voting citizens. I pay your taxes, you know, I pay taxes, I pay your salary, etc. That gets attention. That gets sent out, you know, and the congressman or woman expects a response, you know, from the U.S. government on that. So they pay attention to what their constituents say. And the message that I would put out there is those of you who vote in American elections, you are constituents. You should not be shy about speaking up. If you don't know enough about the issues, you can come to Arrow's website and we can help you get briefed up on them. If you want, advice on how, best to approach, people on Capitol Hill or people in your state legislature about these issues, we can help you, contact us. I always say that the entry drug into Arrow, we had sort of a brainstorming session recently among the board members, and we invited, in fact, some former presidents and former board members of Arrow to all of this. And it was fascinating going around the room, because the one thing that became very clear was that many of us had come to Arrow because we had gone to the website, and because we were looking for information about taxation, about FATCA, about citizenship, about voting. And we saw, wow, there's a lot here. This is something I feel like I need to get involved with. This is something I need to support. This is something I need to try to change things in Washington. And I would encourage all of you, if you haven't already done so, to do that. And if you feel strongly enough about it, that you want to either join Arrow or you want to see how you may be able to help us, please contact us. And Adrian, this may be the point at which we put up the slide. Adrian or Patty, this may be the point at which we put up the slide that shows how to get a hold of Arrow. Can we do that? There we go. No, that's that you've jumped the gun. Oh my gosh. The other slide. The one that has the contact information and the website.
Okay, hold on. I'm having a technical difficulty. That's all.
Okay.
It was
All right.
all set up and then it showed the wrong slide. So what can I do?
I'm just
Let's
glad it's
see.
you and
Share
not me,
screen.
Adrian.
Okay, let's do it. Now we can do that. How's that?
There we go.
Is that better?
Okay. That's it. So
Sorry.
I'm sure Adrian will be posting this on her website afterwards, and there'll probably be other ways to link to it. The contact@arrow.org is an email address that our extraordinary, superb, wonderful, words really don't describe her, office manager, Catherine checks constantly. And that's the best way to get a hold of us with specific questions, for Arrow. The Arrow webpage below it is how you can get a hold of the more specific information on the topics that I've discussed. How, there's information on membership, there's how to become a member, there's information on all the various issues that I've mentioned. Members can have access to videos and other things that we do online. And then there's the phone number and the street address. We are down in Reed Hall, which some of you may know near Montparnasse is, excuse me, I believe run by Columbia University, but which has office and classroom space for a number of different universities. It's a lovely little area, and I'm hoping those of you who are in the Paris area, when we get back to having live events, will come down, preferably on a really nice day when we can take advantage of the courtyard and all. But that's where we're located. So that's how to get a hold of Arrow. That's how to reach us, and that's how to communicate with us. Now we'll turn to the other part, Adrian, on the membership.
There.
Okay, here's the deal, and I'm a terrible salesman, but here's the deal that we've come up with for those of you who I hope are interested enough and will be inspired enough to think about joining Arrow. Normally, Arrow's membership year runs from September to September. And so it'd be a bit of a drag to be proposing to all of you out there to either wait until September to join, or to try to pay what I think is an overly high right now pro rata amount, for the 4 months that are left before September. So what we have decided is, if you are interested in joining Arrow, we'll not only allow you to join for 12 months, but we'll give you the 4 months before September for free. So what that means is that you would be paying the regular Arrow price for membership, which I will tell you for individuals is, individuals being over 35 is 65 euros a year. Family for a year is 85 euros. And I can't remember when we say family, how many that means. It's certainly husband, wife, or, you specify. It's all, I'm sure, explained there. I don't know what it means for children above a certain age. And then under 35, it's only 35 euros for the year, because we are trying to bring in more.
This is the price of a couple of dinners, okay? It's not a big deal. So everybody on this Zoom needs to go become a member right away, because you need the support. It's just
right. We need the support. We need the support, and a lot of that. If you want to take the screen down, Ellen, who I always defer to, has raised her hand. So, Ellen, let's let Ellen speak up again.
She raised her hand again. I don't know. Ellen's on.
Yeah,
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Okay, good. But we can't see you, Ellen.
Well, you've got my picture.
Yes.
Okay. What I wanted to say is that we give a lot of information. Arrow is a fantastic source of information, but the information, we are the source of our own information. So we need members to keep the information going. We can't be just a group of, a small group of people, because, we'll die out. Yes, we're giving away a lot of information for free to people who are not members, but we need members. We need members to be the source of information.
Well, we have more than 100 people on this Zoom today, and you're about to increase your membership.
Well,
considerably.
let me add to what Ellen said real quickly and say that, to reinforce the point, except for Christine, who's a paid employee, the rest of us in Arrow leadership, we are volunteers. We give up our time and the time we spend putting together the position papers, putting together the background information, writing, because we just did it, and in fact it will be posted soon. We just actually wrote some testimony for the Senate Finance Committee, making exactly the points that I have, which is, come on, you guys, stop thinking of Americans as a bunch of abroad as a bunch of fat cats. We are not a bunch of fat cats. We are Americans just like the rest of you. We'll be posting that online soon, and we will, continue to be putting things out like that. In addition to just, being members and taking part, because we do put out a newsletter every 2 weeks, which has lots of interesting and invaluable information. It's often linking to news reporting about Americans, about particularly financial issues. There's also information about upcoming tax webinars and things like that Arrow is sponsoring. It's a lot of information that comes out twice a week. But what we really want more, we could really use volunteers. We want motivated, energetic, active people, engaged people who want to help make a difference. And so, that's part of it too. I consider joining Arrow to be a bit like joining, but like paying to public radio in the United States. It may not be a resource that you're using all the time, but there are times when you find it absolutely invaluable because it's presenting you information and it's presenting you a point of view, and it's speaking to something that matters to you when you need it. But when you don't need it, it's a good warm feeling to know that by having contributed, you're actually helping something that's meaningful to other people, even if it's not immediately or directly helping you. And I would be remiss, and I don't emphasize this as much as I should, and some people on the Arrow board will criticize me for not having done so up until now. But we do also, for those of you who are coming to France, especially if you are coming to take up residence, we do have a health program under in Arrow, and membership in Arrow is sine qua non. It's an absolute prerequisite to having access to this health program. It is run by, I can't remember what the French words are that make it up.
MSH.
MSH. It's underwritten by Swiss Life, and it provides both sort of full payer insurance coverage, as well as complementary coverage to those people who come here and take on French health coverage. But as is often the case in France, you need to have some sort of supplemental coverage for the things that are not covered by the French by the official health plan. And so it functions as a sort of mutuelle as well. There's information about that on the Arrow website. Those coming to France, if I'm not mistaken, still need to provide proof of adequate health insurance, at least to get started with their residence in France before they consider transitioning to the French.
That is right. In order to get a visa, you have to show you have health insurance. And so I just posted the link to the information on your site.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
And now let me just make sure, because I'm like Abraham Lincoln, and I write everything on the back of an envelope. So let me just make sure I covered everything. So that's it. I'm sorry it took so long, and I hope it wasn't too boring. Oh, Kathleen.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Mystery, one of the board members. I reside in Washington, D.C. William, we had a chat message that I've never been asked before. If I am not an American citizen, but live overseas, can I still join Arrow?
Yes, there is an associate membership possibility. Again, I believe all of that is explained online, and I will take the liberty of saying that the offer to American citizens that I publicized is open to them as well. So they should know that if they decide they want to be part of it, a part of Arrow, that they would get the 14 months as well, or not, sorry, 16 months. So,
Okay.
all right, questions. Gosh,
Well, yeah, let's open it up to the Q&A, and
All right.
Patty can look through the chat and see if there are any specific questions that we can address that are already in the chat.
So we more so had comments than questions.
Okay.
I'm just scrolling through here.
Okay. First, well, while you're doing that, I'd really like to thank William for such an amazing presentation. This is just so far, I mean, this has just been fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such an important issue for all of us living overseas that, you know, we don't do this often enough. We don't talk about these issues enough. So I'm really, really pleased about that. And I'm sure you guys have some questions out there.
Yeah,
Well,
Kathy Gallagher's raised her hand, so I'm assuming, Kathy, you have a question. Feel free to unmute yourself. Are you there, Kathy? There we go.
Kathy, we're ready for you. She's still muted.
Unmute.
There we
Did
go. Thank you.
Did I speak? Okay. I submitted a question earlier to William on of a political nature, really, with expressing some concern over the Islamic extremist movements in France, or maybe there's just one movement, and to what extent he believes that this could influence the election and maybe disrupt tranquility in France in the meantime.
Okay, I'll take off my Arrow president hat to answer that question. This is purely my opinion as William Jordan, former State Department official, and somebody who has talked about terrorism and extremism here before. I think it's going to be an issue. I think what has been unfortunate is that it has resurfaced as an issue because of these recent attacks. I tend to be one of the people who believes that fixating on Islamic extremism or political Islam or, you know, Muslim terrorism, whatever you want to call it, is over exaggerated, largely because the motivations and the realities behind a lot of these attacks are often very obscure. And I do not exclude either, you know, criminality or, well, for lack of a better term, you know, craziness. I mean, somebody just going completely unhinged and doing something absolutely heinous, and then invoking Islam and invoking, you know, and making some sort of a specious or, you know, last minute sort of a pledge of loyalty to the Islamic State or Al Qaeda or any other group, and try to legitimize or to glorify, you know, whatever horrible action that they've taken. Having said that, and you know, and I've always said on to Adrian's group that I wish the world, including France, could be a bit more Israeli in terms of dealing with a lot of this stuff, because this is a reality that we've been living with, certainly in the United States, the territorial United States, not me personally. I've been living with it as long as I was working for the State Department. Terrorism is a reality in our daily lives, and it's bound to pop up at various times. The real issue, this really proves that what makes character and what's important is not what happens, but it's how you react to it or how you overreact to it. And unfortunately, in France, the political scene now is so delicate. I thought it was bad under François Hollande. I think it's really bad now, and this bodes poorly for Macron going forward. And you already see through his interior minister and others a lot of positioning, a lot of frantic positioning, posturing and positioning vis-a-vis the far right. Les Républicains, who are sort of the the official center-right party, are also back in the mode of trying to appease or play to far-right sensibilities. I think that if these attacks continue, and I'm not convinced that there's an active campaign, but let's face it, in France right now, the perception is that just because somebody in Islamic State at some point in time said, attack anybody any way you can in infidel France, to, if necessary, avenge the honor, the dishonor of the prophet or whatever, that has unfortunately become enough in a lot of people's minds to exaggerate and to manipulate public opinion as far as the Islamist threat is concerned. Now, that's my personal opinion. I wish that this were not, as important right now, or some often as important right now as the pandemic, as putting France on a better path economically going forward, as some of the questions having to do with Europe getting its act together. I think there are a lot of other more important issues right now, unfortunately, and I think the people who are carrying out these attacks, or the people who want attacks like this to be carried out, know that the least little thing is going to send the French political class into a tizzy. And that's what I see.
Do you think that the anti-immigration movement headed by Marine Le Pen currently is a rising factor? And isn't it somewhat like what happened with Trumpism in America?
Absolutely. The question about Marine Le Pen, as I see it, is she has already managed to move well beyond what her father ever did. Now, remember, her father never really, I think, wanted to take over. I think his father wanted to be the biggest pain in the butt to every political party in France, and to embarrass and to put political pressure as far as anti-immigration and racist and whatever else you want to call it, on far right, I mean, the whole pro-Vichy thing, among a lot of the diehard FN types is always extraordinarily repellent to me. But Marine Le Pen has reinvented the party. And I think anybody who denies that, or who sees Marine Le Pen as anything other than a viable candidate, largely to take over or to take space that the Republican Party right now is unable to fully occupy, and which, in light of the traditional left's collapse, and nobody else. I mean, and a lot of questions about Macron's movement. I think she, there's this study that came out by the Jaurès Foundation that I think bears reading, by anybody who can read it in French, setting out the situation under which Marine Le Pen's candidacy becomes very real. Because I agree completely with the idea that Macron is not just among people who don't like him. He's not just disliked, he's hated. He's resented. He represents a lot of things to people about what's been going wrong in France, not just for years, but for decades. And I see him as flailing, and I see his government, particularly with its most recent response to the pandemic. Remember, a year ago, most of us Americans who were residing here weren't ready to hop on the planes and fly back to the US for salvation. But now, and it's not entirely Macron's fault, it's not entirely France's fault, it's a lot of Europe's fault. But now, there are Americans who resent the fact that they're being held, in France because they can't get on the plane and fly back and get a vaccination. And you look at what's going on in the US with the Joe Biden presidency, and they say, my God, look at what's going on. The roles have reversed. I think that Macron is vulnerable. And I think that in the absence of anybody else right now, particularly on the center traditional right, to pose a real challenge to him, Marine Le Pen is going to be it. And the biggest threat to, or the main reason why Le Pen may get in is not because of an enthusiastic group of people voting for her, but it's because of the folks who will not vote again for Macron if it ends up being in the second round, Macron versus Le Pen. They're sort of tired of that game anymore. And so that's where I think, you know, the manipulation on the margins by those people who want to play up the Islamist threat, you know, to try to convince wavering Republicans that, yeah, you know, we need to have somebody in there, you know, an Eric Ciotti type, you know, we need Nadine Morano, you know, we need to have somebody who's hard on crime and security issues. We need to have somebody, you know, who will clamp down on immigration. Well, they'll go for Le Pen, much in the same way that Republicans who were absolutely not going to vote for Hillary Clinton in 2016 opted to vote for Trump.
Or abstained, which ended up hurting that situation also.
Well, you know, let's remember, Macron basically won, in my view, in 2017, not because people enthusiastically voted for him, but because they either abstained or because a lot of them abstained or they didn't want Marine Le Pen. There were a lot, you know, if he hadn't decided to get his wife all of these made up jobs and take gifts of, you know, custom tailored suits and, you know, some other things, you know, François Fillon should have been president. He should have been elected, and he would have been elected in 2017, in my opinion. But you know, but you look at the actual numbers of people who voted for Macron in 2017, and you crunch them against the total number, you know, the total votes in the electorate, and you look at the abstentions. Macron basically won with, if I remember correctly, well less than a plurality, you know, well less than 50% of the vote. He came in at like 35 or 40% of the total vote, you know, including the blank ballots and the abstentions. That's a dangerous situation to go into a presidency with. And let's look at, you know, La République En Marche's electoral record in the municipals. We'll see what happens in the regional elections. And the European elections were not a great thing for a party that did incredibly well in its first and only parliamentary election. So
it looks like we have a question from Charlie Berg. Charlie, you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, hi, and thank you. You answered, frankly, most of my question, but just a quick follow-up on that. So from a political standpoint, I've read a lot about young people just not caring and not wanting to vote. Sounds sort of familiar to a lot of what had happened here. So to the point of if Marine Le Pen were to win, as far as buying property in France and being able to actually live in France, is she that anti-foreign that this is going to become a big impediment to trying to buy in France? I noticed somebody had written, they had read somewhere that she felt you had to speak French to be able to get a residency card. I'm just sitting here in the US in Orlando and, you know, seeing everything that's going on and seeing the apathy and seeing it almost feels like the French sort of flirting with the same thing that happened here with Trump of like, what do we have to lose? I kind of feel like there's an example of what they could lose, but I'm just a little more concerned in looking to buy in France. What's that going to look like in a couple of years if she wins?
That's a good question, but William, maybe you know more about the French legal system, whether that's something she can just arbitrarily pass into law, or if she has to have support.
I think she will need, you know, again, Macron proved that even if you're elected with a relatively weak majority overall, you can do gangbusters in the parliamentary elections. I went out on a limb, and actually in a paper I wrote for the U.S. government, on this and said that I thought we could find ourselves in an interesting constitutional pickle in France where, you know, you have a president who's been elected and a sort of a hung parliament where the president can't get a full majority of his own party or people who support him. My theory was blown out of the water because I felt as though, you know, and this is the thing, is that the municipal election sort of proved, and the senatorial elections, to the extent that they're actually representative, seem to bear out that the socialists, which was the party that lost the most in 2017, actually still had a strong position locally, and the center right as well. You know, the Greens made some inroads in the municipal elections, but and Marine Le Pen's party did okay, but it was still a very modest. It was still very modest. You know, the thing is, you know, all of that would again tend to reinforce the notion that, well, she may not be able to pull it off, you know, in terms of getting the parliamentary majority. She needs to pass legislation. But Macron proved that, you know, a brand new party, and remember, he founded that party like 2 years before he ran. It came together and actually managed to get a working majority in the parliament. So I don't put it entirely past Le Pen to be able to do that, in which case, if she gets a majority, she will probably ram through a lot of more restrictive legislation. Question is, how is it all going to be, you know, how will it all be written and how will it all be applied?
Going to economically hurt the country enormously if she were to do something like that.
Well,
Because
I think if
huge amount of foreign investment, period. Huge.
Well, I think a lot of people will freak out, you know, by the idea of her coming in. But again, you know, Marine is, you know, is very definitely on a charm offensive. You know, she's walking back a lot of the more arch statements that she ran on even in 2017. I don't think it's a given that she's going to win, but again, I think that the hatred factor for Macron and the you know, on s'en fout sort of mentality among a lot of other people who don't see or who are turned off by a rematch between Le Pen and Macron, you know, could be decisive. The thing that, you know, remember the last time there was a real Republican sense of unity faced with the Front National, as it was called then, was back in 2002 when Jean-Marie managed to get into the second round of elections. And, you know, and everybody did come together. And if you look at the figures, yes, there was a certain amount of abstention, but I think there were a lot of socialists who and Greens who basically bit the bullet and said, screw it, you know, the Republic is more important than anything. And, you know, Marine is not, you know, Marine is doing everything that she can to position herself as no longer being totally anti-Europe, and no longer playing up this kind of republicanism that used to mark a significant part of the Front National. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not convinced. I think that the economy will take a hit, and I think that, you know, and you know, again, after having dealt with the terrific sense of self-reflection, whether the model of hopping back and forth between France and the United States works for me, you know, during the pandemic is viable anymore, I may have to rethink everything from scratch if Marine wins. But other than reimposition of the ESF, the wealth tax, and probably a whole host of stupid relabeled socialist policies, I'm not really sure what immediate difference Marine Le Pen is going to make.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody, any other questions? We've got about 15 minutes left.
I have a couple private messages sent to me where people had questions about, does Arrow offer any sort of tax preparation, recommended accountants, or anything regarding taxes for Americans?
We do have, yeah, we do. We do have a list of I think it's only in France though. We don't have, I'm pretty sure we don't have a good database around the world. That's actually something we need. You know, we're very France focused, but we do have members in at least 40 countries. And I'm trying to do more to build out, you know, further. Actually, this past year, the first year of my presidency, I was supposed to be doing a lot of events like this, and a lot of groups, and preferably traveling around Europe, the UK, places I could get to. And it never happened because we really do want to build out. I mean, the biggest, I will use this opportunity to stray a bit further to say the biggest concentrations of American expats or Americans overseas are not in Europe, not in France, but they're in places like Canada, Mexico, you know, Central America, and you know, some other places in South America and the Far East that you can probably well imagine. France, I think, comes in about 20th or 30th on the list in terms of the best available figures. But the problem is we don't have good census data for that. But yes, we do have information on tax preparers here in the Paris area. And we also do, we're actually in the process of rethinking this. We want to do more tax preparation. Normally this time of year, Arrow does live or online tutorials relating to tax preparation for Americans overseas, things they need to be aware of vis-a-vis the filing their 1040 forms. And then we have also done a similar thing for people filing in France. I want to try to change the model slightly so that people get more specific, down and dirty sort of questions that aren't more as much of a come on for the tax preparers to build business. I actually want to pay the tax preparers to do kind of a clinic and then ask people to pay to participate in these things in the hope that, you know, for those of us, because I tend to be one of these people who can do their own taxes, but then come up with like one or two things that they just really don't understand, and they can ask those specific questions and get some specific answers. So
I think that's a great idea. And you know, there'll be lots of people participating in this because we're all sort of at a loss. I mean, it's one of the toughest things we have to deal with is how to deal with the taxes on both sides.
Right. And James, I want to just signal that James Keegan put something in the chat room that I'm glad that he did that, and I'm glad I saw it out of the corner of my eye. Arrow does something. We're doing it twice a month, right, James? We're trying to do it twice a month. Where we have early in every month. I think it's the first Monday of every month. We do what's called a meetup at lunchtime here, French Paris lunchtime. So it's a little early for those of you in the States, but it used to be at a restaurant. In fact, we were doing it at Breakfast in America for a while. And it's now gone online. And it's an opportunity, in fact, for a lot of these kinds of discussions, these kinds of questions and answers, drilling down into things. We do breakout rooms, so people want to talk about tax issues, immigration issues, travel issues, or even current events. You know, there's a room that they can go to. It runs about 90 minutes to 2 hours from about 12:30, I think, in the afternoon. And it's very freewheeling. And it's intended to bring on new members. It's also a place for current members to you know, to talk and to meet. And then we're also doing something I think in the middle of the month, and you can find all this on the Meetup website as well as the Arrow website, if I'm not mistaken, which is more of a kind of like this. It's in the early evening Paris time, and it's meant to be more drinks for those of us in Paris, and lunchtime, on the East Coast of the US, probably breakfast time back in California. But it's meant to be another opportunity for people to get together. And so I want to make sure you all are aware of that. It's as close as it's as close as we come, Adrian, to Après Midi without having a speaker.
I'd like to answer. You can hear my phone ringing in the background, so just ignore that. But I'd like to answer a comment that someone just made, Nicole, I think, Grimet, who said, I'm amazed at how many of her old co-workers are planning to move to Europe with their jobs on a visitor visa, yes, illegal, yet only being slapped on the hand. And I'd like to explain that that is not illegal. This is off topic a little bit, but basically when you get a visitor visa, you are supposed to sign a document that says you're not going to work in France. But that means you're not going to take away a job from a French national. So if you come with a job that you're doing in the United States, okay, with, your US company or US clients, and you're doing it from sitting in a place in Europe or France, and you're living here and you're tax resident here and you're reporting your income from that, then there is absolutely nothing illegal about it. And I just wanted to sort of explain that, okay, because it's a huge misconception for a lot of Americans who are moving over here or who are planning on it.
If I could just, as a former consular officer, because these distinctions are important for us, you said visitor visa in English. And I'm assuming you mean
carte de séjour,
mention visiteur. Yeah, because that's an important distinction. A lot of people hearing that might think that, oh, I can come over because you can do it without a visa. We'll have to worry about ETA or whatever it's called, down the road. But if you were saying that to somebody coming to the United States, a visitor visa, you'd be talking about somebody who's coming on a, like a tourist visa.
Right. No. That's the visa waiver program.
Right.
This is a visa that enables you to be here more than 90 days.
And after 5 years, you can apply for your full-time carte de séjour, which gives you the right to work.
Carte de résident, right, which does give you the right to work in France. But it's sort of a misunderstanding about being in France physically versus, bringing a job with you that has nothing to do with France. Those are different situations. So I just wanted to clarify that for someone. We've got 8 minutes left.
Only if you can only do that after 5 years if you filed a French income tax. If you haven't filed a French tax, I don't believe that you can get a carte de séjour for after 5 years for longer than that. It's year to year.
Yeah, although I will. Again, I don't know what they're doing now. My personal experience was that I had to provide my déclaration des impôts, every year. I mean, I made sure that they saw when I went in for my annual renewal of my visiteur carte that I paid my taxes. I didn't want anything to go wrong. I tend to be like that. I was always the person at the prefecture who went through, they went through my files, and I was always waiting for them to say that there was something wrong, and they would go through it like once, twice, 3 times, and they said, well, I can't find anything here. So, we wish everybody was like you. So.
Nancy, that's basically true, okay, except you don't have to show that you've earned any money.
Right.
You just have to make the declaration.
You can't earn money. That's part of having a visitor visa. So you haven't earned any money here. Therefore, I pay taxes in the US. I don't pay taxes here. I make no money here. And I agree to that year to year to secure my carte de séjour every year. But
you have to have a tax return, even if it shows 0 income.
The distinction I would make, because I have 2 bank accounts that earn interest, as I mentioned. I never had anybody question my earning interest on a bank account. But if I had gone and I was offered many of these jobs, if I was offered you know, to speak, well, you mentioned the École Militaire. If I was to go speak at the École Militaire and they said, we want to pay you, you know, so much money for having done that, I'd say, no, I actually can't accept it because that's very nice of you, but I can't earn any income. If I earn even a, you know, $1, you know, or €1 for doing something, you know, that screws up my, I mean, I violated my status here. So I was very pure as far as that was concerned, but I never had anybody, and that's the only thing I ever declare because I don't have any other French income. I've always declared my interest because that's declared to the French government, and it would be stupid of me not to put that on my déclaration. But I've never had anybody question when I was a visiteur. I never had anybody question that.
Well, I can tell
Yeah.
you that I had to renew my own carte de séjour visiteur every year for 10 years before they would grant me a carte de séjour résident. But I've been teaching people how to survive for many years because I had to figure out a way to survive and manage to do that.
Yeah.
So there are ways, okay, of doing this. And the only thing they really care about ultimately is that you report and pay any taxes you owe them. That's and the two departments have nothing to do with one another. Immigration has nothing to do with the fisc.
Right.
And there are ways to make this work. So that's
Tim
One
Smith?
question I was going to ask back to what William was discussing earlier on about on the American side. Just in my own impression, I kind of agree with everything William said about having myself travel to Washington a couple of times and going up to the Hill firsthand. And I'm not saying there's not people on Capitol Hill that are not hostile towards overseas Americans. But something I do think is an issue is I think there is a lot of hostility in academia and in the media and in kind of the think tank world. So in my impression, I think at least I haven't been to all 535 members of Congress offices, but of the ones I have been to, I'd say the vast majority of them do want to try to be helpful. I think the hostility comes more from the think tanks and the academics that rotate in and out of the executive branch, the tax law professors and economists and people like that are not really constituency oriented. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on whether maybe you agree with that or not. Or, I mean, I look at like the Senate Finance Committee hearings and it's, you know, they have all these witnesses, different tax law professors, etc. And they seem to not be a particularly friendly group towards overseas Americans. And I wonder if anyone has any ideas at why there is kind of this hostility towards overseas Americans coming out of the academic and think tank worlds.
I'll go out on a limb here and let Kathleen Mystery from Washington, who acts very often as our representative back there. She's on the board and she knows how Washington works probably much better than I do. There are a couple of things that I would say. First of all, you know, one of the first questions that every congressperson asks, or every staffer working for a congressperson asks when somebody approaches them is, you know, how are you important to me? Do you vote? You vote in my district? And do you have any money that you're going to contribute to my campaign? But I mean, the latter part doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to get your foot in the door, but the first part will have a lot to do with whether you get any time or attention. You know, I also think that when you're talking about some of the harder core Arrow issues, it's probably very easy, by contrast, you know, when you're talking about voting or nationality, to find sympathetic ears and to find people who are prepared to work with you, because that tends to be, you know, a sort of cross-cutting set of issues. But when you're talking about taxes, when you're talking about banking, when you're talking about things that actually have an impact on the budget and revenue and that kind of thing, I think it becomes harder. And I have heard some people express the view, say that, there are people on Capitol Hill who basically say, well, life's unfair. Laws are unfair. I mean, yeah, we try to we talk about how we want to make them fair, but somebody is going to have to pay, and somebody else is going to get away with not having to pay. That's just how it all comes out. I'll tell you, and again, I don't want to turn this. I don't want we are competing with ACA, which is a slick and wonderful organization, and I will tell you that we all are in the same trenches fighting these battles. And we all, and as much as you might support Arrow, you should also be looking at ACA and possibly supporting them. They do take a harder nosed and a more insider Washington, because that's where they're located, view of this. They feel more strongly than we in Arrow do about the necessity in fighting citizenship-based taxation, on the need to stress the money and how Washington is going to make up the revenue by not taxing Americans overseas the way that they do than we are. We see it as an issue of fairness, of justice, and all the things, mom, apple pie, baseball, hot dogs, you name it, Chevrolet, all the things that, are very emotional for Americans. And so hence we are taking on this issue of, it's, the tax policy is just plain wrong. And it's wrong because you think that Americans overseas represent this. And the reality is no, Americans overseas are more like Americans in the United States. And so that's why you need to change the tax regime. That's not, if you're talking to people on, Senate Tax Committee, House Ways and Means Committee, or the Joint Committee on Taxation, especially if you're talking to staffers, you're not going to get much more than the time of day. But ultimately, I believe that's the approach we got to take.
Yeah, I'll just add my approach, and I was kind of freelancing a little bit. I was somewhat there on behalf of some like the accidental American groups, as I did the foreign policy aspect of it. And that's where I got support from some of your, what you might call some of your newer national security oriented members of Congress, people like Seth Moulton, Abigail Spanberger, Milky Sherrill, those people who generally are not on Ways and Means but are involved in, foreign affairs and armed services and things like that. And that angle did kind of work for me, at least with those members. And there's some members that have very, or I would consider very narrow constituencies. Someone like Dina Titus, her main constituency is, Las Vegas and the hotel and entertainment industry. And as long as she makes sure she's promoting their interests, she has kind of a lot of free time to do whatever else she feels like.
Hey, listen, you guys, I'm sorry to interrupt and cut this off, but we are after 8 o'clock.
Okay.
And people are, well, I'm really sorry. People are starting to leave because, the time is up. So Tim, I guess we're going to just have to continue this conversation.
Yes.
Can I just say real quickly, Tim, I think we
William,
need you in Arrow. I think we need you, to either sign up as a member or at least contact us to volunteer, or to volunteer at least to talk about your experiences with this.
Yeah,
Kathleen probably like to hear some of this in more detail. So
yeah,
that's
exactly. So William, is there anything you'd like to close with? Anything in particular?
Thank you very much for paying attention. I hope it was informative, worthwhile, useful, helpful, inspirational. More than anything else, I hope it inspires you to look seriously at Arrow, to think seriously about how you as an engaged American citizen can work to help change things. We in Arrow are ready to assist you in that in terms of providing information. And if you feel the desire or motivation to get to do more and join Arrow, and more important, to volunteer to help us with everything, we will be very grateful. And it will bring us further to achieving, you know, some of the goals that are vital to all of us.
William, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. I
My
think
pleasure.
everybody enjoyed it. I expect everybody to join Arrow if they're not already members. I mean, it's a very small price to pay to support a group that's really working on for our interests, and our interests are serious. I mean, as overseas Americans, we really do have to put up with a lot. So again, thank you very, very, very much. I hope that you'll be back next year again, and we'll schedule that soon. And
Anytime.
thank you to everyone for participating, and hope you have an absolutely fabulous rest of day and summer.
Thank you,
Okay,
Adrian.
bye everybody. And don't
Thanks,
forget,
William. Thanks,
we are
everybody.
recording this, so you can send this on
Bye-bye.
to your friends, and we'll be promoting the link in tomorrow's Nouvelle Lettre. Okay?
Fantastic.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.